Hi, welcome back to my channel, Eldon Acres. My name is Andrea, and I'm so happy that you're back with me today. So today it is Sunday, so we are going to do a little bit of meal prep as I like to do on Sundays. First off, we're going to be making some French bread. Now, I make this a lot, and anytime that I make this, I always double the recipe. This bread freezes beautifully, and I love to have it on hand. We use it a lot to make garlic bread or bruschetta. It's beautiful for bruschetta, but we use it even more for sandwiches. Now, not like your cold meat sandwiches, usually leftover roast beef sandwiches where we'll do them as kind of like a hot sandwich, like you'll melt your cheese, toast it in the oven kind of thing, and then put your toppings on. So we go through a lot of this bread, so anytime I have all my ingredients and all my tools out, I like to double it and then have some in the freezer that we can easily just pull out and use when we need it. So this is a recipe from Scratch Pantry. It's not my recipe, but it works beautifully. I use it all the time. That's the recipe there, and I will link it down below for you if you want to try it as well. So it's super easy. Now, one little trick that I will tell you about anytime you're making bread, whether it's this recipe or any recipe, heat up your bowl. So that will help your rise so much. So I've just got some hot water in here right now, just heating my bowl up. Once I'm ready to use my bowl, I'll just dump the water out and we'll be good to go. Another little tip is when you're using water for your bread, I've got my water measured out here. Ideally, you want it around 110 degrees Fahrenheit. As long as you use warm water, that's going to just help the yeast activate a little bit quicker and just make sure that everything's good. So my water right now, it's a little bit warmer than I want it, but I'm gonna be a couple minutes before I'm ready to use it anyways. So it's just measuring at about, 128. So I know I took it out pretty quick there, but anyways, it's pretty close to 110. And that's just water straight out of my tap. I just let the water heat up a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and dump out my water here and we are going to get going. Okay, so I've got my empty bowl preheated here, ready to go. So anytime you're making bread, when you're using a traditional yeast, you have to activate it first. So normally how we do that is put it in your warm water in your bowl for about 5 minutes and let it become nice and foamy. So that's what we're going to do. Now I'm using an active dry yeast. Another little hot tip, anytime that you're using active dry yeast in a jar like this or a package, anytime you open it, just add the date that you've opened it on the top. So this one's getting close to about the time where I'm probably going to toss it out and repurchase. You're supposed to use it within about 6 months of opening it. So I opened this one around June 29th, it looks like. It's October 6th today, so we're probably getting close to the time. It'll still be just fine, like it hasn't been 6 months since June, of course, but we got to get using it up. Now, because it's October, we're coming into the cooler months, so I'll be making a lot more bread than I do in the summer months. We just seem to enjoy more bread in the cooler months. So it calls for a tablespoon of active dry yeast, and I know that does seem like an awful lot, but like I said, I've made this recipe many times and it turns out perfect every time. Now, I had mentioned that I'm going to double this recipe, which I will, but I'm not going to double it in the bowl. I'm just going to make 2 batches, I guess is how I need to word it, because my stand mixer can't handle how big this is going to be when it's doubled, because the recipe does call for 5 cups of all-purpose flour. I should also mention this makes 2 loaves of the French bread. Okay, so we've got our tablespoon of active dry yeast. We also need a tablespoon of sugar. Get that in there. I'm just gonna rinse off our spoon. I don't want any of that goodness to go to waste. And then we're going to add our hot, warm water. And then we just give it a stir. You just want to make sure that sugar gets combined with that water, and those yeast granules get activated. I'm just going to show you what it's looking like right now. So just kind of like a cloudy water. Now we're just going to leave this for about 5 minutes, and when we come back to it, it's going to be nice and foamy on the top, and that's how you know that your yeast is good, healthy, active, and it's going to get you a good rise. So I'm just going to put a few things away, and we'll get going on the next step. All right, so that's what your active yeast should look like. So that's great. We've got that organized. Now, while I was waiting for this one to activate, I did go ahead and prep another one in a separate bowl. So what we'll do is we'll just get this dough ready, we'll transfer it to another dough for the rise, and then we'll mix that one up as well. So we can just kind of be, you know, using the most of the time that we have today. Okay, so the next step, we're going to add our flour. So we add 3 cups of flour first, we get that mixing, and then we add the last 2 cups while it's mixing. So we're just going to go ahead and measure out our flour. Now I'm just using an all-purpose flour. It doesn't have to be a fancy bread flour for this recipe. I have used a bread flour for it, and I do really like how it turns out when you use a bread flour, but we're not going to do that today. We're just going to, nice and easy. So that's 3. Now I'm going to get my 4th cup ready to go. I'm just going to set it aside here. All right, so I'm going to get this on the stand mixer and we'll start working it. Now I'll bring you over here so you can see, but I do have my dough hook attachment on my stand mixer, so it's going to work the dough for us. Also, I should mention, you'll see just over here, yesterday, if you watched the video that I uploaded this morning, we harvested some of our squash. So we have the Butternut baby squash, I believe is what they're called. So I've got 4 of them that I've just scrubbed up just over here. They're just on a tea towel drying, and we're going to also make butternut squash mac and cheese. That's one of our meal prep items for this week, so it sounds delicious to me. I'm not sure, I think my daughter will like it. My husband isn't usually a huge butternut squash fan, but I think I'll be able to kind of disguise it a little bit in this meal. We'll see what happens. All right, so we've got our 3 cups of flour in here with our water, our sugar, and our yeast. And I just got thinking, I think I need to add salt here. So just a moment and let me double check the recipe. Yes, 2 teaspoons of salt. So I'm going to add my 2 teaspoons of salt now. I'm so glad that I caught that. I have made bread where I have forgotten the salt in the past, and let me tell you, it just does not turn out the same. I'm just going to scrape down the sides. Just want to make sure everything is getting incorporated before we add any more flour. Okay, so with this recipe, we want the dough to be smooth and not sticky. So I've added the 5 cups of flour, but you'll see like it's still pretty sticky. So I know with this recipe, I usually have to add about another 1/2 cup of flour. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. And I don't really measure it exactly, but we're gonna add that in there and let it continue to knead. All right. So that's looking much better. That's the consistency we want. It's nice and smooth. It's not too sticky. You know what? I'm gonna add another maybe tablespoon of flour. I just want it a little bit smoother. Okay, I've got the consistency I want, so I'm just gonna get it off the dough hook here. You know, the recipe says to let it knead for 4 to 5 minutes, so once you get it to the consistency you want, just let it do its thing. Okay, so that's what we're looking like now. Now I'm going to get it into, it's still pretty, it's pretty good. We're going to get it into a well-oiled bowl, and we're gonna let it rise for about 30 minutes. While I'm putting this one in another bowl, I will continue on with my second batch. Okay, so I'm just gonna prep this bowl here. I just have some cooking spray. I'm just gonna give it a little spray around. And then I've got my dough formed into a beautiful ball. Look at that, just gorgeous. We're gonna set it in there, and we're just gonna give it another little spray. And then I have these beautiful bowl covers that were made for me. We're just gonna put that on top and put it in a warm place. So usually I like to put it in a windowsill. Today is a relatively warm day, so I think I'm just gonna leave it here on the counter to do its thing. So we're just gonna set it aside there. And then we're gonna come back to our other batch and get going on that one. Okay, so I've got both of my French bread dough ready and rising. So now they just need to rest and rise for about 1/2 an hour. So as I said, normally I just put these in the windowsill, which is where I will move them to actually, just so they're out of the way so they don't get bumped. But a little tip, if your house is a little bit cooler, and I know this time of year it can be, if it's too cold for your dough to rise, usually you want it to be around, I mean, the warmer the better, but at least 70 degrees where you're gonna put them. So if your house isn't that warm or you can't find a warm spot for them, you can just put them in your oven and just turn the light on. So your oven light will just, create a perfect warm environment for them, and they'll rise beautifully. But today we don't have to do that. Luckily it's about 20 degrees outside and it's a bit warmer here in the house, so I'm just gonna pop them in a windowsill for about 1/2 an hour and let them do their thing. So while these are rising for 1/2 an hour, we are going to get our baby butternut squash prepped and into the oven to roast. All right, so I've got my 4 baby butternuts here, or butternut baby, whatever you want to call them. And we're gonna get them started. Now I've got my oven preheating to 400 degrees. That's how I normally like to roast them. And I don't peel them or anything. I just kind of cut the top off just to get rid of the stem, as close to the stem as possible. You don't want to lose too much flesh. And another thing, a little tip, I like to keep a bowl for any scraps, and these will go to the chickens. They will absolutely love them. So we're gonna just cut it in half. One thing I'm already noticing about these is they're a lot easier to handle than traditional large butternut. Look at that, beautiful. I am really liking these. Okay, and then we're just gonna take a spoon and we're just gonna scoop out the seeds. And sometimes this part can be a little bit finicky, so just do it over your compost bowl or your garbage. It's kind of like cleaning out a pumpkin. It smells so good. There we go. Just like that. That's perfect. So I'm just going to do the same thing to the rest of them, and then I'll come back and show you how we like to season them. Okay, so I've got all of our butternut squash prepped and ready to go. So just cut in half and taking all the seeds out of them. So anytime I'm roasting butternut squash, I don't really worry too much about, you know, how they fit in the pan. They're just gonna go in the oven basically to roast, and any of their edges that are kind of touching the pan are gonna get nice and kind of roasted, like a little bit like browned and caramelized, so it'll turn out fine. I'm not gonna get out another pan just because one of them doesn't fit. So anyways, a super easy way that we like to prep them to go in the oven is I'm just gonna drizzle some nice olive oil over top of them. It doesn't have to be fancy, you're just gonna drizzle away. And then I like to use garlic salt. And I don't particularly measure, just a few pinches sprinkled all over, just to give it a really nice flavor. Perfect. And then some freshly ground pepper. Beautiful. So that's what they're looking like right now. Now you want to flip them so that they're flesh side down, skin side up. So we're just going to flip them over, just kind of nestle them in. There we go. So that's perfect. I'll just kind of give the outer skins maybe like just a little rub with some of that olive oil. It doesn't really matter with the outer skins because of course we're going to take all of the flesh out of the skin, and then the skin's going to go to the chickens, but make sure everything's just kind of squeezed in there. Oops. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to pop them into the 400-degree oven. Now, a normal butternut squash takes a good hour or so. I expect these will be a little bit faster because they're smaller, but we'll just keep an eye on them. I'll check them after half an hour and then we'll go from there. How do you check them is you just want to kind of poke a fork into them and you want them to be nice and tender, almost like a mashed potato consistency. So we're going to get them into the oven and get that going. Okay, so we've got our butternut squash roasting in the oven there, and we've got our French bread doing its first rise. We're getting close to being able to shape it, but before we do that, I want to get going on soup. So we're going to make a chicken soup. We might do like chicken and dumplings, I'm not sure yet. Either way, I just want to get some chicken used up. So we had this chicken left over, it was in the freezer. We pulled it out last night and used it for nachos, and then it was a big freezer bag, so then the rest of it I knew that I wanted to go ahead and use it for meal prep this week. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. I just wanted to let you in on a little secret that I use all the time. So this bag is a diced vegetable mix, and it comes with celery, carrots, onion, and peppers, diced peppers. So it's perfect if you're throwing together a quick soup. This saves so much time. Now, I don't always do this. A lot of times I do go through the process of chopping and dicing the vegetables, especially because I grow a lot of these in the garden. But on a day like today where I just need to get some meal prep done and going and I don't have a ton of extra time, this comes in so handy. Now, this is the only brand that I have been able to find this mix in, and it's only carried at certain stores around me. So hopefully you can find it if you want to, but that's what it looks like. So in my pot here, I just have some leftover bacon grease and butter, just heating up in a pan. So I'm gonna add this. This is just half a bag. We're just gonna let that cook down for a couple minutes. Now, another little tip, save your bacon grease. Anytime you cook bacon, put it in a jar, throw it in the fridge. It keeps for quite a while in the fridge, but anytime that you're doing anything like this, anytime that you would use butter or even olive oil to fry something in, you can replace that with bacon grease. I don't know about where you live, but where I live, butter is really expensive. It's usually about $6.99 for a pound. I think that's how it comes. So normally we would just throw out bacon grease or bacon drippings when you make bacon, but save it. It adds a beautiful flavor to something like soup or stew. I use it all the time. Last night when we made our nachos, we heated up our chicken in a frying pan with a little bit of bacon grease, and it adds a beautiful flavor. So I would highly suggest trying that too, and it's basically free. Normally you would throw it out. Now, I want this soup, stew, whatever it's going to be pretty hearty. So I have a bag of diced carrots and celery that I had frozen in the freezer. And then I've got about, I don't know, maybe a cup or so of frozen shredded zucchini from the freezer that we grew in this year's garden. So I'm going to add that too while we've got our other stuff sauteing. Again, it's all frozen, so we're just dumping it in and it's going to fry and saute at the same time as everything else. Now, I'll reuse these freezer bags. They just had vegetables in them, so we'll give them a quick rinse and we reuse them. I wouldn't reuse them if they had raw meat in them or, you know, something like that, but when they just have frozen vegetables, I always reuse them. I hate throwing stuff like that out because you could easily reuse it. Okay, so we're just gonna let that do its thing, and it is about time to start shaping our first round of dough. Okay, so we've got our first round of dough here, and it has doubled in size. We're just gonna punch it down. That's my favorite. And then we're gonna well flour our surface here. So this recipe, as I mentioned, it makes 2 loaves per bowl. So we're going to cut this one in half. We'll just kind of set that one there. And then this one, we're going to go ahead and get rolled out into a rectangle. Beat up old rolling pin here. So the recipe says to roll it out into a rectangle about 15 inches by 8 inches. I'll be honest, I never really measure. I just kind of do whatever looks right and seems like it's going to fit on my pan. You'll notice behind me here, I just have a couple pans prepped, ready to go. So ideally, if you can keep it kind of in a rectangle shape, that's going to make life a little easier. I really need to get a new rolling pin. This one does the trick, but it's definitely tired. It's lost its handle. I still have it somewhere, but it's more of a pain in the butt than anything. So you'll see this dough is pretty springy, which is good. But you can kind of stretch it out by hand if you want to as well a little bit. It's starting to smell so good in here with that soup base started, and then the butternut squash in the oven. Those beautiful fall smells. Okay, I'm gonna call that pretty good. It just keeps springing back, which is fine. We will fix that in a minute. So now what you want to do is start from the long edge and just roll your way up into a loaf shape. This can be kind of intimidating if it's your first time doing it, but it's super easy. Kind of like making cinnamon rolls, if you've ever made cinnamon rolls. And if you haven't, you totally should. And they're delicious. Okay, so once you get rolled up, you're going to take the seam and pinch it together. And I just kind of pinch and roll at the same time. So just kind of helps ensure your seam's not going to come apart. And then with the ends, I just kind of take the ends and kind of roll them. Actually, I'm going to roll them up because we're going to put this seam side down on the pan. So you kind of want all your seams to be somewhat in the same area. Now this end is a little bit odd shaped, but that's okay. It'll still bake up beautifully. Just double check that all the seams are good. And I'm just going to grab the pan. So I've got my stone pan here. I love using this pan. It's well seasoned and the bread comes out beautifully off of it. So again, we're going to put seam side down. So we've got our seam there. We're going to put seam side down. And I just want to make sure it's nice and even. And it's a little long, but that's okay. You know what, I'm just gonna kind of shorten it up just to make sure it sits all right on there. Okay, so that's the first one. Now we're gonna get the other one rolled up as well. I'm gonna set this back out of the way actually. I need a bigger island. We're waiting on a big storm. We don't usually get like thunderstorms in October, but we're expecting a pretty big one this afternoon, and the thunder and lightning has, can you hear that? You might not be able to, but it was the thunder coming, and I keep seeing flashes of lightning. Hopefully we don't lose power. We don't typically, but sometimes it happens. So we're just going to do the same process. Now you'll notice this one doesn't seem to be springing back quite as much, and that's probably because I didn't kind of pre-shape it before I started rolling it out. I also find after I've done one of them, it all kind of comes back to me, the muscle memory of rolling out the dough. All right, so that looks pretty good. And we're gonna do the same thing. Just kind of start rolling it up. And again, we're going to pinch the seams, and again, kind of pinch and roll. That will just help ensure they seal well. And the same thing with the ends. We're just going to roll the end kind of over top of itself and then pinch it. Okay, I'm going to grab our pan back and set this one on the pan as well. And again, we're going to take and put it seam side down, right beside the other one. And you don't want them too close because these ones need to do a second rise. You also don't want it too close to the edge. Beautiful. So now what we need to do is get a wet tea towel or a damp tea towel, and we're going to put our damp tea towel over this. So I'm going to do that and we'll be right back. So I've got our clean damp tea towel here. And we're just going to drape it over top. And again, now we're going to put it in warm-ish place. So I'm going to pop it, I don't really have room here, so I'm going to pop it back in a windowsill again. And then we're going to let this one rise. So it can rise for 30 minutes to an hour. So typically what I do is I will let this one rise for about half an hour or so. And then we're going to score it, and then it bakes for 18 to 22 minutes. So then the second one, it will also do its rise for probably about, you know, after all that time, maybe it'll be about 45 minutes, and then it'll be ready to go when these ones are coming out. So it kind of works well to double the recipe. It just kind of keeps you hopping. So I'm going to go ahead and shape the second one, and we'll see you back when we pull our butternut squash out, because it's probably just about done as well. Just adding a couple cups of our preserved frozen garlic, so that'll thaw in there as well. Okay, so we've got our soup base here. I've let it just kind of simmer away. There was a lot of liquid in that frozen zucchini, so it's just kind of been simmering away. We just added, as you saw, our garlic pucks, and I've decided that I want to do this as kind of like a creamy based soup. So we're going to do a roux, and how you do that is to your butter, you add some flour. Now, I've, of course, got my veggies and everything in here, but that's okay. We'll still be able to make a roux. There's still liquid in there, so I'm going to go ahead and add my flour now. Alright, so we're just simmering away here. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle. This is about a 1/4 cup of flour. Let me just kind of sprinkle it on top there. Give that a mix. We're going to let the flour cook in here for a couple minutes just to get rid of that flour flavor. Let's see how quickly that liquid has just been soaked up. So I haven't seasoned the soup at all yet, so I'm going to go ahead and add some salt and pepper now. I'm not really measuring anything for this soup, which is usually how I tend to cook. And for our chicken stock, I don't have any pre-made. any pre-made. So I saw this at the grocery store and I thought we'd give it a try. It's a concentrate. So you use this plus 3 cups of water will make 4 cups of broth. So I've got my water here, I've got my milk and my cream that I want to get used up. So we're gonna just go ahead. I'm gonna add my milk and cream first. I've only got about, I don't know, half a cup of cream left to use up, so I'm gonna add that. Get that in there, and then I'm gonna probably add about 2 cups of milk. Give it a shake. Looks about right. Give that a stir. I'm going to scrape up the bottom. So this is a non-stick pan, so we don't technically have to deglaze the pan, but any of the brown bits on the bottom of the pan I want to work up because that's all flavor. And look at how beautiful and thick that's getting. So before it thickens too much, I'm going to add my broth concentrate and my water. So we're going to add this entire thing in there. If this works out well and we like this, I think I'll buy, well, I bought, they were on sale for like $1.50 for one of these, which is a pretty good price around here. Now I've got my jar of water, and it's warm water, it doesn't really matter, but get that added in there. Give this a stir and let that start to thicken back up. Anyway, so what I was saying about that concentrate, they're super small, so they take up hardly any room in your pantry or your cupboards. So I'm hopeful that we will like that, and that'll just be nice to have as a backup for when I don't have any homemade broth, which I don't at the moment. I do have some chicken carcasses in the freezer to make some, but I just haven't had a chance to get it made yet. Okay, so we're going to let that thicken up and get beautiful and delicious, and then I will add the chicken. The chicken's already cooked, so we don't need it to be in there any longer than just to kind of heat things up. I believe our butternut squash is ready to come out of the oven, so we'll pull that out and then we will prep to put our bread in the oven next. I decided that I'm gonna go ahead and add our chicken now. It'll just add lots of beautiful flavor. So here it is. There are some bones in here, so I'll put it all in there and then we'll fish the bones out, of course, before we eat it. We're just gonna add that in there. Carefully not to splash our soup everywhere. So this freezer bag I will not reuse just because of what was in there. But I did go ahead and add some of that hot broth to the bag because I wanted to get all that delicious goodness that was left over. And we're just gonna dump that back in. Oh my goodness, I wish you could smell how good this smells. Maybe should have used my bigger stock pot. I do that every time. Okay, so we're just gonna let this simmer away. I might pop out to my herb garden. It's pouring down rain right now, but I might take one for the team and go out and harvest some thyme, fresh thyme to put in here. Oh, that's gonna be so delicious. Okay, so we've got our beautiful butternut squash out of the oven. I just have to show you. I'm gonna flip that one over. Oh, look at how delicious that looks. I don't know if you can see, but the edges are kind of like browned and caramelized. It's still hot. I should probably have oven mitts on, but I just had to show you. So we're just gonna leave those out on the counter here to cool. But in the meantime, our bread has risen, doubled in size. So it's been just over half an hour. Now, typically, a little fuzz there. What I like to do is kind of flatten these down a little bit. Now I know that kind of goes against everything, but we, like I said in the beginning, like to use these as sandwiches. So otherwise they just get like really, really high and thicker, and we want them kind of thinner and wider, if that makes sense. So we're just gonna kind of give them a little squish. And now we're going to score. So I do have a bread scorer. I use this when I make sourdough. You can just use a knife, or if you have like a little razor, you could use that. We're just gonna put 3 slits in each of these. Certainly doesn't have to be perfect. Mine never are. There we go. Okay, so now these are gonna go into the oven for 18 to 22 minutes. And my oven is already preheated to 400 because that's what we roasted the squash at. So we're gonna put these in the oven. My soup over here is just kind of simmering away, and then we'll get the second round of bread, the same process. All right. So that soup is done. It is absolutely beautiful. I cannot wait to eat this one. I think we are just going to leave it as that right now. I'm gonna let it cool, and then we'll store it in the fridge and enjoy that later on this week. Now we are going to get on to our butternut squash mac and cheese. All right, so we are just waiting for our first round of bread to finish up in the oven. Just over here, I've got a pot of salted water on to boil for our macaroni. So I figured while we were kind of in a limbo state, we might as well go ahead and get our butternut squash processed. So this is super easy. It should be nice and tender. So you're just going to take your spoon and just kind of scoop around. It's pretty important that you wait until it's cooled and you can handle it. And it comes away from the skin just like that. So that's perfect. So we're just gonna keep going now. The mac and cheese recipe calls for, I think it was 4 cups of butternut squash. So this might be a little bit too much, but that's okay. Whatever is left over, I'll probably add to the soup. I feel like that would be delicious. All right, this one kind of fell apart on me, but it's okay. And I'm just gonna put the skins back into that pan, and again, they'll go to our chickens. They will love that. Chickens, and of course fill the goose. I could just eat this how it is. It would be so delicious, but I'm really excited for this recipe. I also got looking around in the fridge. I always like to have a look in our fridge on Sundays when I'm doing meal prep days, just to see if there's anything in there that needs to be used up. I hate wasting food. And I saw that we had a package of prosciutto that should be used up. It's still got about a month left on the expiration date. but I thought that that would be so good to put on top of this mac and cheese. And then while it bakes, it's gonna get nice and crispy. If you have never had like crispy prosciutto, it's amazing. It's a must do. And it just kind of elevates a dish. And I think it would go really well with the butternut squash. So that's what I plan to do. Now, this is technically like an all-in-one meal for me. It's got all your components, it's got your carbs, your veggies, and a protein, kind of. But what we'll probably do is I would normally have like a meatball with this, or leftover chicken or roast beef or something, and then a salad on the side. We will probably eat this for supper probably tomorrow night, because tonight we are having the beef dip sandwiches. So we'll see what happens. Time will tell. All right, so my water is just about boiled. I've got about a minute and 14 seconds left on our first loaves of bread. So I'm just gonna try and get this finished up while we're waiting. Now, if you're ever unsure if your bread is cooked on the inside, a little trick is you want the internal temperature of your bread to be at 200 degrees. So we'll just check. So I'm gonna call that good. Oh yeah, there we go. Because it's on the stone pan, it's gonna continue cooking for a couple minutes. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay, perfect. So that is first round of bread done. I'm gonna go ahead and get the other one prepped and into the oven next. Hey Google, set timer for 6 minutes.
Okay, 6 minutes. Starting now.
Friends, this recipe turns out to be one of my very favorite butternut squash recipes. If you're like us and you've got some butternuts coming out of the garden or even purchasing them at the grocery store, you have to try this one. I always find butternut squash is a little bit tricky because I think it's one of those vegetables that you either love or hate. I myself absolutely love it, but my husband Brandon isn't a huge fan. So anytime I make it, I either have to kind of like hide it in something or just hope that he'll suck it up and eat it, which he usually does. I can't complain too much, but this one was definitely a winner. We ended up making this one ahead of time, and then when we cooked it, as I say in the end, we do add some prosciutto, torn up prosciutto onto the top, and then when you bake it to reheat it, that prosciutto gets nice and crispy and absolutely delicious. This recipe is super easy. I will link it down below, although per usual, I don't follow it exactly. Surprise, surprise. But the recipe, if you follow it exactly, I know it's a good one. It's got really great reviews, and I love the creator that made it. I highly suggest you try this recipe. It is so good and the perfect fall meal. And as I said, we absolutely love it. It came together pretty quickly. It wasn't too difficult. I made everything in this one pot, and honestly, I could have kept it in this one pot and saved on the dishes, but I just wanted to put it in more of a baking dish style, just so that there was more surface area that we could add some beautiful prosciutto to. You'll have to let me know if you guys try this one and if you love it as much as we do. If you don't have a hand blender, you can absolutely pour this mixture into a blender. Just be very careful. Even when using a hand blender, you have to be very careful. I totally should have taken my pot off the warm element when doing this, so don't follow what I do. But even if you don't have a blender or a hand blender, you can totally just have your butternut squash kind of pureed before you put it in there, and then it will work just as well. I added a ton of cheese here because we absolutely love cheese, but you don't have to add this much either. Again, this was just what we did, but the recipe, I believe, only calls for 2 cups. Again, I think I made more than the recipe calls for of everything, including the pasta. So it all worked out in the end. And this recipe, actually, we ended up freezing half of it. And I can also confirm that it freezes absolutely beautifully and reheats wonderfully. So this recipe, all in all, ticks every single box that it needs to in my book, and it will have a permanent place in my recipe book.
Okay, friends, so that is it for today's video. We got, I think, everything accomplished we set out to accomplish. We've got our 4 loaves of French bread. Oh, how beautiful. Cooked to perfection. These are going to be delicious. We've got our cream of chicken soup, I guess. It's looking beautiful too. And then our butternut squash mac and cheese. Now, we're not going to eat this tonight. We're actually not going to eat this tonight either. But when we go to make this, I will top it with torn prosciutto and probably just a little bit of Parmesan cheese. We'll bake this at it actually doesn't call for it to be baked, but I'm going to. So I will bake it at 350, probably for about half an hour, 45 minutes, because it'll be coming out of the fridge, it'll be cold. So we just want to heat it through. It's already fully cooked. We're just going to heat it through and then crisp up that prosciutto. And then the soup here, we will enjoy that one night this week, and then the leftovers I'll put it into the freezer. And then the bread, we're going to have that with tonight's supper. We're going to do beef dip sandwiches, and then the leftovers I'll probably cut each loaf into 5 and pre-slice them so that when we go to use them for garlic bread or bruschetta or sandwiches in the future, it's already ready to go. We can just literally take them out of the freezer, pop them onto a baking sheet, put them right into the oven. Reheating these in the oven for garlic bread, I find it super easy. Just pull them out of the freezer, you put your garlic butter on there, put it onto a baking sheet and bake it at 400, usually about 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, and it's perfect. Of course, you want to add a little bit of cheese, and that makes it absolutely delicious as well. Anyways, guys, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today. It really means so much to me. I really appreciate it. I will link the recipes below that I used as inspiration because, per usual, I didn't really follow them exactly. Well, for the bread recipe I do, but I've just made it so many times that I already know it off by heart. But for this one, I totally did not follow it perfectly, but that's okay. And then the soup recipe, I just kind of made that one up as I went, but I think I have a similar recipe that I can either write out for you guys, or maybe I'll post it to my Instagram because I don't think I've got it on there. Anyways, guys, that's it for today. Feels like it was a long haul today, but I am so excited. I love when I have time to do these meal preps because now all week we are going to eat so well, and then we'll even have extras to go into the freezer. So it's a win-win in my mind. So that's it today, guys. Thanks again so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Take care.